Hello, everybody. No, thank you for that follow. 456. Welcome to the community. How are you doing tonight? And welcome in, everybody. I hope everybody's week is going well, off to a decent start, and does not have you quite as exhausted as mine does. Clearly, I must drink more Red Bulls. Oh, yeah, I'm happy that they just added the brand new reading category on Twitch. Because I've done several audiobooks before, but sometimes I'll use the books category, or most of the time would be in just chatting. Because initially books was very small. Oh, you do narration too. That's awesome. 456. What kind of books do you read, or what do you narrate, I should ask? And also, thank you to everybody who came out to my last couple of streams. Sunday night, we took another whack at Blackthorn and got through a couple more levels. And on Saturday, we finished up both 1213 and Zorro. Good times. Well, some games better times than others. And happy Spooktober. Yes, the month of horror is finally upon us, which is exciting. I know I'd said initially that I might try and finish Full Void tonight to wrap up Cinematic Platformer September, but I had to stay a little late at work, and then the bus was slow getting home, and also I'm just tired. But I did say that also I would try and start this new audiobook stream, which is, being a horror title, it's perfect for Spooktober. So we'll start that tonight, and this will be a nice short stream. There's probably a little more work that I should do. Am I going to? Excellent question. You're interested in doing more non-fiction science fiction. Oh, you narrate horror stories, or short stories for a horror podcast. I'll definitely have to check that out for 456. What's the name of it? And I don't have much of a audiobook catalog. I mostly do games. I just have a couple that I've read up on YouTube in segments, and I keep meaning to edit them together into proper audiobooks and throw them up on LibriVox, because they're all public domain, except for that one I might have done a year before it became public domain. But now it's public domain, and actually I haven't made that one public yet anyway. The other stories, I'll definitely have to check that one out. The book that we'll be reading this year, and surprisingly short, something like 190 pages and fairly large print and wide margins, is Stories in the Dark by Barry Payne, first published in 1901. This is not a first edition. If it was, I would sell it and be rich. Or if not rich, I don't know. Pay the power bill for a couple months. I'll take it. Why do I always start to get congested when I'm going to do audiobook streams? And just as a reminder, I'll have my text-to-speech turned off tonight, and I won't be responding to chat once I start reading. I'll catch up at the end of the stream, so I can keep the flow of the book for the purposes of it being an audiobook. And raids are disabled tonight. Stories in the Dark by Barry Payne. To Mariana Heron Allen. The Diary of a God. During the week there had been several thunderstorms. It was after the last of these, on a cool Saturday evening, that he found at the top of the hill by a shepherd. His speech was incoherent and disconnected. He gave his name correctly, but could or would add no account of himself. He was wet through, and sat there pulling a sprig of heather to pieces. The shepherd afterwards said he had great difficulty in persuading him to come down, and that he talked much nonsense. In the path at the foot of the hill he was recognized by some people from the farmhouse where he was lodging, and was taken back there. They had, indeed, gone out to look for him. He was subsequently removed to an asylum and died insane a few months later. 2 years afterwards, when the furniture of the farmhouse came to be sold by auction, there was found in a little cupboard in the bedroom which he had occupied an ordinary penny exercise book. This was partly filled, in a beautiful and very regular handwriting, with what seemed to have been something in the nature of a diary, and the following are extracts from it. June 1st. It is absolutely essential to be quiet. I am beginning life again, and in quite a different way, and on quite a different scale, and I cannot make the break suddenly. I must have a pause of a few weeks in between the two different lives. I saw the advertisement of the lodgings in this farmhouse in an evening paper that somebody had left at the restaurant. That was when I was trying to make the change abruptly, and I may as well make note of what happened. After attending the funeral, which seemed to me an act of hypocrisy, as I hardly knew the man, but it was expected of me, I came back to my Charlotte Street rooms and had tea. I slept very well that night. The next morning I went to the office at the usual hour, in my best clothes, and with a deep band still on my hat. I went to Mr. Toller's room and knocked. He said, "Come in," and after I had entered, "Can I do anything for you? What do you want?" Then I explained to him that I wished to leave at once. He said, "This seems sudden, after 30 years' service." "Yes," I replied, "I have served you faithfully for 30 years, but things have changed, and I have now 300 a year of my own. I will pay something in lieu of notice, if you like, but I cannot go on being a clerk any more. I hope, Mr. Toller, you will not think that I speak with any impertinence to yourself, or any immodesty, but I am really in the position of a private gentleman." He looked at me curiously, and he did not say anything. And as he did not say anything, I repeated, "I think I am in the position of a private gentleman." In the end he let me go, and said very politely he was sorry to lose me. I said good-bye to the other clerks, even to those who had sometimes laughed at what they imagined to be my peculiarities. I gave the better of the 2 office boys a small present in money. I went back to the Charlotte Street rooms, but there was nothing to do there. There were figures going on in my head, and my fingers seemed to be running up and down columns. I had a stupid idea that I should be in trouble if Mr. Toller were to come in and catch me like that. I went out and had a capital lunch, and then I went to the theatre. I took a stall right in the front row, and sat there all by myself. Then I had a cab to the restaurant. It was too soon for dinner, so I ordered a whiskey and soda, and smoked a few cigarettes. The man at the table next me left the evening paper in which I saw the advertisement of these farmhouse lodgings. I read the whole of the paper, but I have forgotten it all except that advertisement, and I could say it by heart now, all about bracing air and perfect quiet and the rest of it. For dinner I had a bottle of champagne. The waiter handed me a list and asked which I would prefer. I waved the list away and said, "Give me the best." He smiled. He kept on smiling all through dinner until the end. Then he looked serious. He kept getting more serious. Then he brought 2 other men to look at me. They spoke to me, but I did not want to talk. I think I fell asleep. I found myself in my rooms in Charlotte Street next morning, and my landlady gave me notice because, she said, I had come home beastly drunk. Then that advertisement flashed into my mind about the bracing air. I said, I should have given you notice in any case. This is not a suitable place for a gentleman. June 3rd. I am rather sorry that I wrote down the above. It seems so degrading. However, it was merely an act of ignorance and carelessness on my part, and, besides, I am writing solely for myself. To myself I may own freely that I made a mistake, that I was not used to the wine, and that I had not fully gauged what the effects would be. The incident is disgusting, but I simply put it behind me and think no more about it. I pay here £2 10 a week for my 2 rooms and board. I take my meals, of course, by myself in the sitting room. It would be rather cheaper if I took them with the family, but I do not care about that. After all, what is £2 10 a week? Roughly speaking, £130 a year. July 17th. I have made no entry in my diary for some days. For a certain period I have had no heart for that or for anything else. I had told the people here that I was a private gentleman, which is strictly true, and that I was engaged in literary pursuits. By the latter, I meant to imply no more than that I am fond of reading, and that it is my intention to jot down from time to time my sensations and experiences in the new life which has burst upon me. At the same time, I have been greatly depressed. Why? I can hardly explain. I have been furious with myself. Sitting in my own sitting room with a gold-tipped cigarette between my fingers, I have been possessed, even though I recognized it as an absurdity, by the feeling that if Mr. Toller were to come in suddenly, I should get up and apologize. But the thing which depressed me most was the open country. I have read, of course, those penny stories about the poor little ragged boys who never see the green leaf in their lives, and I always thought them exaggerated. So they are exaggerated. There are the embarkment gardens, with the press band playing. There are parks. There are Sunday school treats. All these little ragged boys see the green leaf, and to say they do not is an exaggeration, I am afraid a wilful exaggeration. But to see the open country is quite a different thing. Yesterday was a fine day, and I was out all day in a place called Wensley Dale. On one spot where I stood I could see for miles all around. There was not a single house, or tree, or human being in sight. There was just myself on top of a moor. The bigness of it gave me a regular scare. I suppose I had got used to walls. I had got used to feeling that if I went straight ahead without stopping I should knock against something. That somehow made me feel safe. Out on that great moor, just as if I were the last man left alive in the world, I do not feel safe. I feel the track and get home again, and I tremble like a half-drowned kitten until I see a wall again, or somebody with a surly face who does not answer civilly when I speak to him. All these feelings will wear off, no doubt, and I will be able to enter upon the new phase of my existence without any discomfort. But I was quite right to take a few months' quiet retirement. One must get used to things gradually. It was the same with the champagne, to which, by the way, I had not meant to allude any further. June 20th. It is remarkable what a fascination these very large moors have for me. It is not exactly fear any more. Indeed, it must be the reverse. I do not care to be anywhere else. Instead of making this a mere pause between 2 different existences, I shall continue it. To that I have quite made up my mind. When I am out there in a place where I cannot see any trees or houses or living things, I am the last person left alive in the world. I am a kind of a god. There is nobody to think anything at all about me, and it does not matter if my clothes are not right, or if I drop an H, which I rarely do except when speaking very quickly. I never knew what real independence was before. There have been too many houses around, and too many people looking on. It seems to me now such a common and despicable thing to live among people, and to have one's character and one's ways altered by what they are going to think. I know now that when I ordered that bottle of champagne, I did it far more to please the waiter, and to make him think well of me than to please myself. I pity the kind of creature that I was then, but I had not known the open country at that time. It is a grand education. If Toller were to come in now, I should say, go away. Go back to your bricks and mortar, and account books, and swell friends, and white waistcoats, and rubbish of that kind. You cannot possibly understand me, and your presence irritates me. If you do not go at once, I will have the dog let loose upon you. By the way, that was a curious thing which happened the other day. I feed the dog, a mastiff, regularly, and it goes out with me. We had walked some way, and had reached that spot where a man becomes the last man alive in the world. Suddenly the dog began to howl, and ran off home with its tail between its legs, as if it were frightened of something. What was it that the dog had seen and I had not seen? A ghost? In broad daylight? Well, if the dead come back, they might walk here without contamination. A few sheep, a sweep of heather, a grey sky, but nothing that a living man planted or built. They could be alone here. If it were not that it would seem a kind of blasphemy, I would buy a piece of land in the very middle of the loneliest moor and build myself a cottage there. July 23rd, or June 23rd. I received a letter today from Julia. Of course she does not understand the change which has taken place in me. She writes as she always used to write, and I find it very hard to remember and realize that I liked it once, and was glad when I got a letter from her. That was before I got into the habit of going into empty places alone. The old clerking account book life has become too small to care about. The swell life of the private gentleman, to which I looked forward, is also not worth considering. As for Julia, I was to have married her. I used to kiss her. She wrote to say that she thought a great deal of me. She still writes. I don't want her. I don't want anything. I have become the last man alive in the world. I shall leave this farmhouse very soon. The people are all right, but they are people, and therefore insufferable. I can no longer live or breathe in a place where I see people or trees which people have planted, or houses which people have built. It is an ugly word, people. July 7th. I was wrong in saying that I was the last man alive in the world. I believe I am dead. I know now why the mastiff howled and ran away. The whole moor is full of them. One sees them after a time when one has got used to the open country, or perhaps it is because one is dead. Now I see them by moonlight and sunlight, and I am not frightened at all. I think I must be dead, because there seems to be a line ruled straight through my life, and the things which happened on the further side of the line are not real. I look over this diary, and I see some references to a Mr. Toller, and some champagne, and coming into money. I cannot for the life of me think what it is all about. I suppose the incident described really happened, unless I was mad when I wrote about them. I suppose that I am not dead, since I can write in a book, and eat food, and walk, and sleep and wake again. But since I see them now, these people that fill up the lonely places, I must be quite different to ordinary human beings. If I am not dead, then what am I? Today I came across an old letter signed Julia Jarvis. The envelope was addressed to me. I wonder who on earth she was. July 9th. A man in a frock coat came to see me and talked about my best interest. He wanted me, so far as I could gather, to come away with him somewhere. He said I was all right, or at any rate would become all right with a little care. He would not go away until I said that I would kill him. Then the woman at the farmhouse came up with a white face, and I said I would kill her too. I positively cannot endure people. I am something apart, something different. I am not alive, and I am not dead. I cannot imagine what I am. July 16th. I have settled the whole thing to my complete satisfaction. I can without doubt believe the evidence of my own senses. I have seen, and I have heard. I know now that I am a god. I had almost thought before that this might be. What was the matter was that I was too diffident. I had no self-confidence. I had never heard before of any man, even a clerk in an old established firm, who had become a god. I therefore supposed it was impossible until it was distinctly proved to be. I had often made up my mind to go on that range of hills that lies to the north. They are purple when one sees them far off. At nearer view they are gray. Then they become green. Then one sees a silver network over the green. The silver network is made by streams descending in the sunlight. I climbed the hill slowly. The air was still, and the heat was terrible. Even the water which I drank from the running stream seemed flat and warm. As I climbed, the storm broke. I took but little notice of it, for the dead that I had met below on the moor had told me that lightning could not touch me. At the top of the hill I turned and saw the storm raging beneath my feet. It is the greatest of mercies that I were there, for that is where the other gods gather, at such times as the lightning plays between them, and the earth and the black thunderclouds, hanging low, shut them out from the sight of men. Some of the gods were rather like the big pictures that I have seen on the hoardings, advertising plays in the theatre, or some food which is supposed to give great strength and muscular development. They were handsome in face and without any expression. They never seemed to be angry or pleased or hurt. They sat there in great long rows, resting, with the storm raging in between them and the earth. One of them was a woman. I spoke to her, and she told me that she was older than this earth, yet she had the face of a young girl, and her eyes were like eyes that I had seen before somewhere. I cannot think where I saw the eyes like those of the goddess, but perhaps it was in that part of my life which is forgotten and ruled off with a line. It gave one the greatest and most majestic feelings to stand there with the gods, and to know that one was a god oneself, and that lightning did not hurt one, and that one would live forever. July 18th. This afternoon the storm returned, and I hurried to the meeting place, but it is far away to the hills, and though I climbed as quickly as I could, the storm was almost past, and they had gone. August 1st. I was told in my sleep that tomorrow I was to go back to the hill again, and that once more the gods would be there, and that the storm would gather round us, and would shut us from profane sight, and the steely lightnings would blind any eye that tried to look upon us. For this reason I have refused now to eat or drink anything. I am a god, and I have no need of such things. It is strange that now, when I see all real things so clearly and easily, the ghosts of the dead that walk across the moors in the sunlight, and the concourse of gods on the hilltop above the storm, men and women with whom I once moved before I became a god, are no more to me than so many black shadows. I scarcely know one from the other, only that the presence of a black shadow anywhere near me makes me angry, and I desire to kill it. That will pass away. It is probably some faint relic of the thing that I once was, in the other side of my life, on the other side of the line which has been ruled across it. Seeing that I am a god, it is not natural that I can feel anger or joy any more. Already all feeling of joy has gone from me, for tomorrow, so I was told in my sleep, I am to be betrothed to the beautiful goddess that is older than the world and yet looks like a young girl, and she is to give me a sprig of heather as a token, and it was on the evening of August 1st he was found. This is all. It was a very hot summer day. The doctor's brougham had been waiting in the shade of the chestnut avenue leading to the big white house. Then a servant brought out a message. "Morning, Jameson." He knew the coachman. "Stopping to luncheon? You're to go round to the stables." "I guessed as much. What, is he worse this morning?" "No, not a bit of it." Then, confidentially, "Between ourselves, there's no more the matter with Mr. Wyatt, nor there is with you nor me." "So I've always supposed. If you can be surprised at anything, you will not make a good coachman. Well, I'll see you later." And the wheels crunched slowly along the gravel. In the meantime, Mr. Alexander Wyatt paced the entire length of his great library. He was lean, tall, bent in the shoulders. His hair was grey and rather too long. His face was clean-shaven and ashy in colour. He looked worried, hunted. Dr. Holing watched him narrowly. The doctor was no younger, but his hair was black. He was a giant. His chest was broad and deep, and he stood 6'3" in his socks. His face was slightly florid, and his figure showed some tendency towards corpulence. But he looked like a man of the world, and not like a mere sensualist. There was that distinction. Under the heavy brows were the eyes of a man who quite knows what he wants to know, and is quite sure he knows it. He looked confident and clever. "My dear fellow," said the doctor, "the long and short of it is that you ought to have come to me long ago. I don't mean in Harley Street. I mean here at home. Of course, I wouldn't see any ordinary patient here, but an old friend like you. Yes, you really ought to have come to me." "I might have come up to Harley Street. It is only an hour away. You go there and back most days in the year, and I might have taken the journey for once. I don't know why I didn't, but I thought of it. But you're always so busy." "Busy? Well, yes, but I don't let myself be so busy that I can't see a friend who's ill." Wyatt sighed heavily. And now you're spoiling one of your rare holidays for my sake. I say, old man, do take a fee, a proper fee, something in proportion." "Now, don't talk like that. If fee had had anything to do with it, I could have come to you and suggested that it might be as well if I just went over to you. Besides, I wouldn't give up a day of my holiday for any fee. Why should I? I've already made more money than I shall ever spend. I'm not stopping because I've got a patient. I'm stopping because an old friend is ill." "It is very good of you. Very, very good. Come back to the point. Why didn't you send for me before? You must have known that you were ill." "I had my suspicions. I didn't want to think about it." "And so you waited until, from mere casual observation, I also had my suspicions and told you so. I think you were foolish. Come now, what were you afraid of? I haven't hurt you." No, said Wyatt. "Of course not. But I didn't want to know that I was going to die." There was a longish pause, and Wyatt's eyes grew rounder and stared. "Oh, my God! Oh, my God!" he muttered to himself. "Well," said Dr. Holing. He hated these exhibitions, but he spoke sympathetically. "I can't die," stammered Wyatt. It mustn't be." "You will find, ultimately, that you can die," said Dr. Holing. "We all shall. If you will persist in working yourself up into this condition of shivering of nervous panic, you will die rather sooner, or possibly very much sooner, than you otherwise would. Come, man, you may have another 10 or a dozen years, if you'll avoid every kind of stress. You're wealthy, have no ambitions, have no hard work, are not passionately attached to anybody. It is highly unlikely that the stress will come upon you from the outside. Take care that it does not come from within yourself." You're right. I shall pull myself together," he said, but he still spoke excitedly. I only gave way for the moment, 10 or a dozen years at the least, with absolute moderation, quiet living, self-restraint, and so on. Who knows that it might not be a score of years? The doctor looked at him curiously and said nothing. There, you see, I'm all right. I faced the situation. And now, tell me exactly what's the matter with me. Heart, said the doctor laconically. I know that, Wyatt said irritably. I want to know the name of the disease, and if there's any complication. Well, I shall tell you. I shan't tell you. You'd try to look yourself up in your old edition of Roberts' Theory and Practice of Medicine, and you'd find something more or less like yourself, and it wouldn't do you any good. Some doctors would have told me. Hang it, then go and ask them, said Dr. Holing quite quietly. Whomever else I meet in consultation, it's quite certain I won't meet my own patient. Of course not. I only mentioned it. I'm not silly enough to go to any other doctor. Never dreamed of it. Of course I know very well that you're the first man on heart. I'm not so ignorant of medicine as you suppose. Ah, said the doctor cheerfully, I wish you were twice as ignorant, or else knew 1,000 times as much as you do. Luncheon was announced. The doctor rose smiling. Poor Wyatt did what he could during luncheon to shake off the heavy depression that weighed on him, but he did not make much of a host. He could only talk of his own illness and speculate on what death really was. On these subjects Dr. Holing had little to say, but he spoke of the rising value of land in the neighborhood, and Wyatt was a landlord. Wyatt heard with a wretchedly simulated cheerfulness on his sad, sallow face. What would it profit him, though he gained the whole world? Wyatt had been in his day the brightest and best of companions, but when a man's material heart within him has taken on autumnal tints, the man's spirits droop also. Both, the doctor knew, were symptomatic. And he who knew this, and had known the old Wyatt, was patient, but when he was being driven away from the great white house, he became very sad. That afternoon Wyatt sat crouching in a big easy-chair in his library, alone. It was a hot day, but he had a shawl wrapped around his feet. Latterly his feet had been always cold, as though already they felt the chill of wet earth. There was a pile of books on the table beside him and on the floor. He turned avidly and restlessly from one to the other. There were comforting books of religion. There were terrifying books of religion. There were works of metaphysics. There were blasphemous diatribes. There was science conscious of its limitations. Now he would take for company some drunken tinker, jeering at the notion of a hereafter, repelling by its brutal ignorance, but appealing by its complete self-confidence. And now again he would hear the calm voice of science. There are beautiful stories, but I dare not tell you that they are true. In some places where it has been possible to test them, and I have tested and found they were not true. As to the rest, those stories seem more beautiful than probable. I shall wait for verification or disproof, not with folded hands, but working at other things. He had always feared death, and now for many long days and nights he had busied himself in this futile search for something certain about it. He heard 100 voices all crying differently, and knew not to which he should listen. He used to make attempts, from time to time, to pull himself together. He made one now. "What does all this concern me?" he said aloud. "I'm not going to die. Holing said so. Holing gave me 20 years with reasonable care, and he knows what he's talking about." He pushed the books aside contemptuously. "Pack of nonsense." He picked up instead a catalogue that his wine merchant had sent him. There was some port of a fairly recent vintage that he wished to put down. "That's it," he said, marking the catalogue with a pencil. "We'll say 50 dozen. He rubbed his chilly hands together and hummed a light tune. At 5, his man Jackson brought him a glass of whiskey and water, carefully measured. Wyatt had got into the habit of drinking a good deal of strong tea in the afternoon while he pottered over his collections. One philatelic, the other 18th century autographs. The doctor had forbidden tea, and Wyatt, even when he was pulling himself together, obeyed the doctor. Holing had forbidden late hours also. Wyatt had induced, the habit of insomnia. Before the doctor's interference, he would never go to bed before 2 or 3 in the morning. After one of his own delightful dinners, or if he had been dining out, he would still sit up. He professed that these hours were of incalculable value, that he could not live in society unless for a little time each day he lived absolutely alone. All the lights were put out except in the library. The rest of the house went to sleep. Wyatt smoked, read, thought about things. At intervals he sipped strong coffee. It was only when he found himself unable to keep awake that he lit his candle and went upstairs. Every night, or early in the morning, as his candle lit the long mirror on the landing, he saw himself reflected, and the reflection always came as a surprise. He never looked as he supposed that he looked. Sometimes the reflection seemed almost unrecognizable. "I can't sleep before 3 in the morning," Wyatt had maintained to the doctor. "Then it must be morphia," said Holing. He called that night with a hypodermic syringe, and that night Wyatt went to bed at 10 o'clock and slept at once. "But I mustn't go on with morphia, of course," said Wyatt knowingly. "It won't be necessary," said Holing. "You see, after I've given it you for 3 nights, I shall have broken through your habit. Then you at once return to the normal state and go to sleep at the ordinary time." The doctor reeled off this absolute nonsense with an air of the utmost gravity and conviction. He knew his patient. He had never given him any morphia at all. He had punctured the skin, but injected nothing. Wyatt's insomnia yielded completely to discreet and masterly humbug and the abolition of his after-dinner coffee. Strong tea and late hours were quite given up now. Wyatt was positively anxious to give things up. In his mad terror of death, he had grown to regard it as a monster to be appeased by sacrifice. He had a notion, vague but deeply rooted, that the more he gave up, the longer he would live. He was almost disappointed that the doctor did not forbid stimulants. Jackson, Wyatt's servant, had been with him for 20 years. When Wyatt was alone, it was Jackson himself who made the after-dinner coffee, for on this point Wyatt mistrusted women. Jackson was a creature of habit. For over a week he had diligently remembered that coffee was forbidden. Tonight he forgot it. Habit asserted itself, and 20 minutes after Wyatt had left the dining room for the library, Jackson entered the library with the coffee. He was considerably startled at his reception. Fits of deep depression sometimes alternate with fits of extreme irritation. Wyatt flew into a mad rage. He swore the wretched man was trying to kill him, ordered him out of the house, and abused him virulently, loudly and at length. "Go! Go!" he shrieked finally. Jackson conveyed the news to the kitchen that there was only one thing the matter with Mr. Wyatt. He was clean off his head. That was all. As Jackson left the library, Wyatt dropped into a chair, his face contorted, covered with sweat, bending forward, his hands tightly fixed against his chest. That awful anginal pain. No, it had never been like that before. It must mean death. Ah, if he could only get to that bell. He tried to call the words. "Dr. Holing, at once," came out in a whisper. The pain ceased, almost suddenly. A strange calm came over him, and for the first time in many days he thought of other people. Dr. Holing? Of course he would not send for him. It would be too bad at that time of night, altogether too bad. Besides, it was his own fault. He had given way to temper and had been punished for it. Why, he might have died. Upon his word, it would have served him right if he had died. Poor Jackson. It was the first time in his life he had spoken to Jackson like that. Well, When he came to die, Jackson was remembered in his will and would forgive him. After all, why live so long, at such care, with such trouble? Nature calls. Obey cheerfully. And the calm became drowsiness, and the drowsiness became sleep all very quickly. It was a lovely sleep, with a consciousness of well-being permeating its faintly sketched dreams. Jackson looked in at 10 o'clock, at 1/4 past, at 25 minutes past, and at 1/2 past. Then he sought Mrs. Palfrey, the housekeeper. "He's still asleep," said Jackson. "You're sure it's sleep?" said Mrs. Palfrey gloomily. "Oh, I leave tomorrow, anyhow, whatever he says," said Jackson. "It's the responsibility I can't stand. It's wearing me. But come and see for yourself." They opened the library door cautiously and peered in. "The top of his shirt front's moving," said Mrs. Palfrey in an undertone. "He's asleep." "Don't he look awful? I won't waken him. I swear I won't wake him." "Better not. Put his candle on the table by the lamp. Cough, as if accidental, as you go out. Then, if he wakes, so much the better. If not, we'll all go to bed, and you'll put the lights out, same as in the old days." Jackson shivered and followed this advice carefully. The cough, as if accidental, was unavailing, and the lights were put out. Only in the library the lamplight fell on the gleaming shirt front, still moving, and on the landing the full-length mirror waited, its eyes closed in the darkness, but ready to wake as the lighted candle came slowly up the staircase to reflect in a moment the figure of the master of the house, dishevelled, late, on his way to bed. He was awake. The lamp had burned itself out. The dawn, the early midsummer dawn, was already advanced. Its light came, tempered yet sufficient, through the ugly Venetian blinds. Through the garden and the country beyond came the shrill concert of innumerable birds. A heavy cart jolted and bumped to early work on some distant road. No, there was no need of the candle. He would go to bed by daylight, with that delightful sense of well-being, that firm conviction that there was no good in worry or argument, still comforting him. Ah, how often at this hour he had trod the stairs, with a fantastic curiosity to see what he looked like in the tall mirror. By this time his head should have appeared in it, coming close to the Japanese cabinet. There in the mirror gleamed the pale gold of the cabinet, and there was the blue and white of the tall oriental vase, and there were masses of dark shadow beyond. Alexander Wyatt found all there but himself. Him only the mirror gave back no more. Back to the library, as in a panic. Something had happened. And there in the library, the spirit of Alexander Wyatt, that the mirror saw not, found in the easy-chair the huddled body, dressed in clothes that no longer moved to the breathing. "I am dead," said Alexander Wyatt, "and this is all." The Moon Slave. The Princess Viola had, even in her childhood, an inevitable submission to the dance. A rhythmical madness in her blood answered hotly to the dance music, swaying her, as the wind sways trees, to movements of perfect sympathy and grace. For the rest, she had her beauty, and her long hair that reached to her knees, and was thought lovable, but she was never very fervent and vivid unless she was dancing. At other times there almost seemed to be a touch of lethargy upon her. Now, when she was 16 years old, she was betrothed to Prince Hugo. With others, the betrothal was merely a question of state. With her, it was merely a question of obedience to the wishes of authority. It had been arranged. Hugo was comme ci, comme ça. No god in her eyes. It did not matter. But with Hugo it was quite different. He loved her. The betrothal was celebrated by a banquet, and afterwards by a dance in the great hall of the palace. From this dance the princess soon made her escape, quite discontented, and went to the furthest part of the palace gardens, where she could no longer hear the music calling her. "They are all right," she said to herself, as she thought of the men she had left, "but they cannot dance. Mechanically they are all right. They have learned it, and don't make childish mistakes. But they are only 1, 2, 3 machines. They haven't the inspiration of dancing. It is so different when I dance alone." She wandered on until she reached an old forsaken maze. It had been planned by a former king. All round it was a high, crumbling wall, with foxgloves growing on it. The maze itself had all its paths bordered with high, opaque hedges. In the very center was a circular open space with tall pine trees growing round it. Many years ago the clue to the maze had been lost. It was but rarely now that anyone entered it. Its gravel paths were green with weeds, and in some places the hedges, spreading beyond their borders, had made the way almost impossible. For a moment or two Viola stood peering in at the gate, a narrow gate with curiously twisted bars of wrought iron surrounded by a heraldic device. Then the whim seized her to enter the maze and try to find the space in the center. She opened the gate and went in. Outside everything was uncannily visible in the light of the full moon, but here in the dark shaded alleys the night was conscious of itself. She soon forgot her purpose and wandered about quite aimlessly, sometimes forcing her way where the brambles had flung a laced barrier across her path, and a dragging mass of convolvulus struck wet and cool upon her cheek. As chance would have it, she suddenly found herself standing under the tall pines and looking at the open space that formed the goal of the maze. She was pleased that she had got there. Here the ground was carpeted with sand, fine and, as it seemed, beaten hard. From the summer night sky immediately above, the moonlight, unobstructed here, streamed straight down upon the scene. Viola began to think about dancing. Over the dry, smooth sand her little satin shoes moved easily, stepping and gliding, circling and stepping, as she hummed the tune to which they moved. In the center of the space she paused, looked at the wall of dark trees all around, at the shining stretches of silvery sand, and at the moon above. "My beautiful, moonlit, lonely old dancing room, why did I never find you before?" she cried. "But," she added, "you need music. There must be music here." In her fantastic mood she stretched her soft, clasped hands upwards towards the moon. "Sweet moon," she said in a kind of mock prayer, "make your white light come down in music into my dancing room here, and I will dance most deliciously for you to see." She flung her head backward and let her hands fall. Her eyes were half closed, and her mouth was a kissing mouth. "Ah, sweet moon," she whispered, "do this for me, and I will be your slave. I will be what you will." Quite suddenly, the air was filled with the sound
Yes, I'm being followed by a Twitch viewer. Twitch viewer, Twitch viewer.
Quite suddenly, the air was filled with the sound of a grand invisible orchestra. Viola did not stop to wonder. To the music of a slow saraband she swayed and postured. In the music there was the regular beat of small drums and a perpetual drone. The air seemed to be filled with the perfume of some bitter spice. Viola could fancy almost that she saw a smouldering campfire and heard far off the roar of some desolate wild beast. She let her long hair fall, raising the heavy strands of it in either hand as she moved slowly to the laden music. Slowly her body swayed with drowsy grace. Slowly her satin shoes slid over the silver sand. The music ceased with a clash of cymbals. Viola rubbed her eyes. She fastened her hair up carefully again. Suddenly she looked up, almost imperiously. "Music! More music!" she cried. Once more the music came. This time it was a dance of caprice, pelting along over the violin strings, leaping, laughing, wanton. Again an illusion seemed to cross her eyes. An old king was watching her, a king with the sordid history of the exhaustion of pleasure written on his flaccid face. A hook-nosed courtier by his side settled the ruffles at his wrists and mumbled, "Ravissante! Quel malheur que la vieillesse!" It was a strange illusion. Faster and faster she sped to the music, stepping, spinning, pirouetting. The dance was light as thistledown, fierce as fire, smooth as a rapid stream. The moment that the music ceased, Viola became horribly afraid. She turned and fled away from the moonlit space, through the trees, down the dark alleys of the maze, not heeding in the least which turn she took, and yet she found herself soon at the outside iron gate. From thence she ran through the palace garden, hardly even pausing to take breath, until she reached the palace itself. In the eastern sky the first signs of dawn were showing. In the palace the festivities were drawing to an end. As she stood alone in the outer hall, Prince Hugo came towards her. "Where have you been, Viola?" he asked sternly. "What have you been doing?" She stamped her little foot. "I will not be questioned," she replied angrily. "I have some right to question," he said. She laughed a little. "For the first time in my life," she said, "I have been dancing." He turned away in hopeless silence. The months passed away. Slowly, a great fear came over Viola, a fear that would hardly ever leave her. For every month, at the full moon, whether she would or no, she found herself driven to the maze, through its mysterious walks into that strange dancing room. And when she was there, the music began once more, and once more she danced most deliciously for the moon to see. The second time that this happened, she had merely thought that it was a recurrence of her own whim, and that the music was but a trick of the imagination that had chosen to repeat. The third time frightened her, and she knew that the force that sways the tides had strange power over her. The fear grew as the year fell, for each month the music went on for a longer time. Each month some of the pleasure had gone from the dance. On bitter nights in winter the moon called her, and she came, when the breath was vapor, and the trees that circled her dancing room were black, bare skeletons, and the frost was cruel. She dared not tell anyone, and yet it was with difficulty that she kept her secret. Somehow chance seemed to favor her, and she always found a way to return from her midnight dance to her own room without being observed. Each month the summons seemed to be more imperious and urgent. Once, when she was alone on her knees before the lighted altar in the private chapel of the palace, she suddenly felt that the words of the familiar Latin prayer had gone from her memory. She rose to her feet. She sobbed bitterly, but the call had come, and she could not resist it. She passed out of the chapel and down the palace gardens. How madly she danced that night! She was to be married in the spring. She began to be more gentle with Hugo now. She had a blind hope that when they were married she might be able to tell him about it, and he might be able to protect her, for she had always known him to be fearless. She could not love him, but she tried to be good to him. One day he mentioned to her that he had tried to find his way to the center of the maze and had failed. She smiled faintly. If only she could fail, but she never did. On the night before the wedding day, she had gone to bed and slept peacefully, thinking with her last waking moments of Hugo. Overhead, the full moon came up the sky. Quite suddenly, Viola was wakened with the impulse to fly to the dancing room. It seemed to bid her hasten with breathless speed. She flung a cloak around her, slipped her naked feet into her dancing shoes, and hurried forth. No one saw her or heard her. On the marble staircase of the palace, on down the terrace of the garden, she ran as fast as she could. A thorn plant caught in her cloak, but she sped on, tearing it free. A sharp stone cut through the satin of one shoe, and her foot was wounded and bleeding, but she sped on. As the pebble that is flung from the cliff must fall until it reaches the sea, as the white ghost moth must come in from cool hedges and scented darkness to a burning death in the lamp by which you sit so late, so Viola had no choice. The moon called her. The moon drew her to that circle of hard, bright sand and the pitiless music. It was brilliant, rapid music tonight. Viola threw off her cloak and danced. As she did so, she saw that a shadow lay over a fragment of the moon's edge. It was the night of a total eclipse. She heeded it not. The intoxication of the dance was on her. She was all in white. Even her face was pale in the moonlight. Every movement was full of poetry and grace. The music would not stop. She had grown deathly weary. It seemed to her that she had been dancing for hours, and the shadow had nearly covered the moon's face so that it was almost dark. She could hardly see the trees around her. She went on dancing, stepping, spinning, pirouetting, held by the merciless music. It stopped at last, just when the shadow had quite covered the moon's face, and all was dark. But it stopped only for a moment, and then began again. This time it was a slow, passionate waltz. It was useless to resist. She began to dance once more. As she did so, she uttered a sudden shrill scream of horror, for in the dead darkness a hot hand caught her own and whirled her around, and she was no longer dancing alone. The search for the missing princess lasted during the whole of the following day. In the evening, Prince Hugo, his face anxious and firmly set, passed in his search the iron gate of the maze, and noticed on the stones beside it the stain of a drop of blood. Within the gate was another stain. He followed this clue, which had been left by Viola's wounded foot, until he reached that open space in the center that had served Viola for her dancing room. It was quite empty. He noticed that the sand round the edges was all worn down, as though someone had danced there, round and round, for a long time. But no separate footprint was distinguishable there. Just outside this track, however, he saw two footprints clearly defined close together. One was the print of a tiny satin shoe. The other's was the print of a large naked foot, a cloven hoof. The green light. The man looked down at the figure of the woman on the couch. The little silver clock on the mantelpiece began to chime. He could not bear the sound of it. He flew at the clock like a madman and dashed it on the ground and stamped on it. Then he drew down the blind and opened the door and listened. There was no one on the staircase. Silence seemed now as intolerable to him as sound had been a moment before. He tried to whistle, but his lips were too dry and made only a ridiculous hissing sound. Closing the door behind him, he ran down the staircase and out into the street. The woman on the couch never moved or spoke. It was late in the afternoon. The light from the low sun penetrated the green blind and took from it a horrible color that seemed to tint the face of the woman on the couch. Flies came out of the dark corners of the room, sulkily busy, crawling and buzzing. One very little fly passed backwards and forwards over the woman's white ringed hand. It moved rapidly, like a black speck. Outside in the street, the man stepped from the pavement into the roadway. A cabman shouted and swore at him, and someone dragged him back by the arm and told him roughly to look where he was going. He stood still for a minute and rubbed his forehead with his hand. This would not do. The critical moment had come, the moment when, above all things, it was necessary that his nerves should be perfect and his thoughts clear. And now, when he tried to think, a picture came before the thought and filled his mind. The picture of the white face with the green light upon it. And his heart was beating too fast, and, it seemed to him, almost audibly. He began to feel his pulse, counting the strokes out loud as he stood on the curb. Then he was conscious that 2 or 3 boys and loafers were standing in a little group, watching him and laughing at him. One of the loafers handed him his hat. It had fallen off when he dodged back onto the pavement, and he had not noticed it. He took the hat and felt for some coins to give the man. He found a half-crown and a half-penny. He held them in his hand and stared at them and forgot why he wanted them. Then he suddenly remembered and gave them. There was a loud yell of laughter. The boys and loafers were running away, and he heard one of them shouting, "Let the old stinker out a bit too soon, ain't they?" And another, "Garn, he's tight, that's all's wrong with him." Again he told himself that this would not do. He must not think of the past, the awful past. He must not think of the future, of his schemes for escape. He must concentrate his thoughts on the present moment until he could get to some place where he could be alone. Yes, Regent's Park would do well, and it was near. He brushed his hat with his coat sleeve, put it on, and walked. He thought about the movement of his feet, and the best way to cross the road, and how to avoid running into people, and how to behave as other people in the street behaved. All the things that one generally does unconsciously and automatically required now for their conduct a distinct mental effort. As he walked on, his mind seemed to clear a little. He reached a spot in Regent's Park where he could lie down in the grass with no one near him, out of sight. "Now," he said to himself, "I need concentrate my thoughts no longer. I can let them go." In a second he had gone rapidly through the past, the jealousy that had burned in his heart, and the way that he had quieted himself and made his scheme and carried it out slowly. It had been finished that afternoon when he had lost control over himself, and through the transparent leaves of the tree near him the sun came with a greenish glare. He shuddered and turned away so that he could not see it. Yes, he had to escape. He had made all the arrangements for that. He drew from his side pocket a roll of notes and counted them, and entered the numbers in his pocketbook. He had changed a cheque for £50 at the bank that morning. The police would find that out and endeavour to trace him by discovering where the notes with those numbers were changed. That was one of his means of escape. He would see to it that the notes were never changed by himself, or in any town where he had been or was likely to be. He was going to sacrifice those 10 banknotes to put the police on a wrong scent. He had plenty of money ready in gold that could not be traced, for his own needs. He chuckled to himself. It was brilliant, this scheme for providing a wrong scent, for making the very carefulness and astuteness of the detectives the stumbling block in their way, and it would be so easy to get the notes changed by others. The dishonesty of ordinary human beings would serve his purpose. His mood had changed now to one of exultation. He told himself time after time that he was right. The law would condemn him, but morally he was right, and had only punished the woman as she deserved to be punished. Only he must escape, and, yes, he must not forget. He looked around. There was still no one near, but his position did not satisfy him. Not a person must see what he was going to do next. He went on and found a spot near the canal, where he seemed to be out of sight and more secure from interruption. Then he took from his pocket a little looking-glass and a pair of scissors. Very carefully he cut away his beard and mustache that hid the thin-lipped, wide mouth and the small, weak chin. He cut as close as he could, and when he was finished, he looked like a man who had neglected to shave for a day or two. A barber would shave him now without suspicion. He was satisfied with the operation. The glass showed him a face so changed that it startled him to look at it. He glanced at his watch. It was time to start for the station, where his luggage had been waiting since the day before, if he meant to get shaved on the way there. He walked a little way, and sat down again. How well everything has been thought out, he said to himself. All would succeed, with a new name, and in another country. Without that drunken, faithless, beautiful woman, he would grow happy again. He had only meant to sit down for a minute or two, but his thoughts rambled and became nonsense, and suddenly he fell into a deep sleep. He had been overtaxed. An hour passed. The train that he had intended to take steamed out of the station, and still he slept. It grew dusk, and still he slept. When the park keeper touched him on the shoulder, he half woke and spoke querulously. Then consciousness came back, and slowly he realized what had happened. As he walked slowly out of the park, his mind refreshed with sleep, he for the first time realized something else. In the awful moment when he had left the woman, he had broken down and forgotten everything. The bag of gold was still lying on the table of the room with the green blind. He must go back and get it. It would be horrible to re-enter that room, but it could not be helped. He dared not change the notes himself, and in any case that amount would be insufficient. He must have the gold. It added, he told himself, slightly to the risk of discovery, but only slightly. His servants had all been sent out and were not to return until 9:30. No one else could have entered the house. He would find everything as he left it, the gold on the table and the figure of the woman on the couch. He would let himself in with his latchkey. No passers-by would take any notice of so ordinary an incident. He had no occasion to hurry now, and he turned into the first barber shop that he saw. His mind was as alert now as it had been when he first formed his scheme. "Let me have your best razor," he said. "My skin's tender. In fact, for the last 2 or 3 days, I haven't been able to shave at all." He chatted with the barber about horse racing, and said that he himself had a couple of horses in training. Then he inquired the way to Piccadilly, saying that he was a stranger in London, and seemed to take careful note of the barber's directions. He walked briskly away from the shop towards his own house. A comfortable-looking, ruddy-faced woman was coming towards him. A shaft of green light from a chemist's shop window fell full on her face as she passed, and the horror came back upon him. It was with difficulty that he checked himself from crying out. He hurried on, but that hideous light seemed to linger in his eyes and to haunt him. "Keep quiet," he kept saying to himself under his breath. "Steady yourself. Don't be a fool." There was an Italian restaurant near, and he went in and drank a couple of glasses of cognac. Then only was he able to go on. As he turned the corner where his house came into sight, he looked up. All the house was dark but for one great green eye in the center that looked at him. There were lights in that room. He stood still close to a lamp-post, just touching it to keep his balance. He spoke to himself aloud. "It's green. It's green. Someone's there." A working man passed him, heard his mumbling, looked at him curiously, and went on. The green eye stared at him and fascinated him. Then other lights darted about, red lights, white lights. Someone must be going up and down the staircase and passages. Had she got off the couch? Was the dead woman walking? How his head throbbed! There were 2 nerves that seemed to sound like 2 consecutive notes on a piano, struck in slow alternation, then quickening to a rapid shake. Whirr, whirr. Now the two notes were struck together, a repeated discord, thumped out, clatter, clatter. No, the sound was outside in the street, and it was the sound of people running. There were boys with excited eyes and white faces, and blousy, laughing women, and little old ferret-faced men who coughed as they ran. A police whistle screamed. In front of the door of the house, a black mass grew up, getting quickly bigger and bigger. It was a crowd of people, swaying backwards and forwards, kept back by the police. The police! He was discovered then. He must get away at once, not wait another moment. Only the green light was looking at him. "Stop that light!" he called. No one noticed him. The green light went on glimmering and drew him nearer. He had to get out of there. He was on the outskirts of the crowd now. Why would not the crowd let him pass? Could they not hear that he was being called? He pushed his way, struggling, dragging people on one side. There were angry voices, a hum growing louder and louder. He caught a woman by the neck and flung her aside. She screamed. Someone struck him in the face, and he tried to strike back. Down. He was down on the road. The air was stifling and stinking there. He tried to get up and was forced back. Ah, now he was up again, his coat torn off his back, muddy, bleeding, fighting, spitting, howling like a madman. Damn you! Damn you all! The crowd was a storm all around him, tossing him here and there. Again and again he was struck. There was blood streaming over his eyes, and through the blood, and mingled with blood, he saw the green light looking at him. There came a sudden lull. A couple of policemen stood by him, and one of them had him by the arm and asked him what he was doing. He began to cry, sobbing like a child. "Take me up there," he said, panting, "where the green light is. It's the dead woman calling." The policeman stood for a moment, hesitating. For a moment the crowd was motionless and silent. Then one of the white-faced boys shrank further back, whispering, "It's the man." And I think that's an excellent place to stop tonight. Interesting couple of stories. All rather different. I liked the Moonslave one especially, but kind of wish they hadn't added the cloven hoof, rather than making it the devil or something like that. Just made it more mysterious. And thank you guys for the follows, and Dragon of the West, thank you for the resub. I'll catch up on chat. You guys, please go check out Dragon of the West. What was it you were playing today, Dragon? Oh yeah, The Walking Dead, the Telltale games. I saw a little bit of that. Let's see. Seeing who else is there. Ah, you're getting some stuff done. Oh, thank you for saying I have an amazing voice, Dragon. And is it J.D. Tillingast? Welcome in. If you're still here, I realized there's something with catching up on chat. Then, yeah, I'm in Pacific time zone too. And hey, Zatara! Glad to see you here. And Matt Glad. And Niftiness. A lot of other great streamers here. Let me give you chaps shoutouts. Matt Glad's a retro streamer, and Niftiness. Oh, you're playing Marvels again. Nice. I'm so glad you failed your COVID test, Matt Glad, so you are COVID-free. Confirmed. That's great. Unless it was a false negative, you could take a couple more just to be sure. Nah. Yeah. I like it when when you don't know where the horror stories are going, and I guess the Moonslave was the one I felt like with the biggest twist, so maybe that's why I liked it the most tonight. Had suspicions about vaguely the way that the green light and the this is all we're going. Yeah. Interesting book. What I was struck by the way is that things in the world seem similar and different when I read something from, well, like more than 100 years ago. Yeah. Hey, Yak Man. You're welcome. Welcome in. I'm glad you find, guilty, tormented murderers going insane and women being carried off by the devil to be nice and relaxing. I shudder to think what you find disturbing. Though some of the things that we play in video games this month may be disturbing. I should raid out. Find somebody to raid. But reading Lovecraft before bed, yeah, I do like some Lovecraft. Makes for some not necessarily pleasant dreams. That's what's coming up on stream. For tomorrow's stream, it's my intention to start Alone in the Dark, the new nightmare, carrying on the tradition of playing an Alone in the Dark game for Spooktober until we run out of them. And this will be the PC version, not the GBC version, though I do have that. I think there'd be a mutiny if I tried to play that. And assuming I can get it working, and I've got to decide which character's game I'll play through. And Saturday, shoot, I don't know what I'll play. This weekend, I'm actually going to see Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, like 4K restoration with my roommates. So what I might do is do the longer stream Saturday and then do short horror Sunday. I've got to plan out games for both of them. Unless we just finish Resident Evil 2 second playthrough on Saturday. Maybe that's what we should do. But I know I need to decide on a second longer game for the month. Probably something adventure. And then maybe next week I'll do the bonus stream where we finish up Full Void. If I can leave work timely and get home without being too tired. And also timely. The fishing in Innsmouth is fantastic. And the swim team is award winning. Yeah, it's a silver lining to that place. They're good, nice place. There are nice things about every town. Hot tub stream. Yeah, I don't know about hot tub streams. Doesn't that require a hot tub? Maybe the trend's gone down because, Twitch frowns on that. Or maybe it's because now people prefer, I don't know, reading horror books from the 1900s. You can't read a horror book in hot tub. What if you dropped it? Well, I guess it's better than if you were playing with a controller and dropped it, and you couldn't electrocute yourself with a controller, right? The Sawyer family. An equal opportunity bunch of killers. Yeah, they don't care about your race or if you're disabled. They kill everybody. Anyway, that's what's coming up. And we'll continue this book, but it might only take 2 more streams to finish it. So then we'd finish the audiobook by the end of Spooktober. If I can cram enough streams in. And then we'll have to find another book to read. Which means I'll probably have to drop $40 on some other rare book. I don't do writing, Zatara. Most I've ever done is read a original horror story every year for Halloween. But think that's just the category, reading and writing, right? I mean, I'm glad Twitch added that, so now I kind of know what category to put for my audiobooks. Yeah, I feel like I'm not sharp enough to do a writing stream. Embarrassed that I wasn't writing faster. Narrate to a writer with pacing and villain poses. It'd be hard to do poses while I'm reading. Damn it, now I want chili. Dictate and write it down later. Oh, one of those dragon naturally speaking kind of things. I never tried that just since I have a decent typing speed. I don't know if there are big name writers who write. I had a couple of friends who have tried it out on YouTube. But I don't know, Zatara. Okay. No kidding. All the voice assistants we use now grew out of Dragon. I didn't know that. And oh, you've done some writing on Stream Niftiness. Cool. What kind of things are you writing? I mean, I don't even know if Dragon's still around. Last time I saw it, I gave a box copy to my friend and mentor right before I went to grad school. Yeah, he's going to see if it worked with Final Draft. I was meant to use it. Might be more productive if I had it. Oh, you're writing a horror novel, Niftiness. That's awesome. Oh, you're thinking you might try streaming for specifically for writing Yak? Sorry. Oh, Zatara. That's really cool. Do you write horror stuff as well? Yeah, a lot of people who enjoy horror do that. I'm sorry, what did Dragon of the West do this time? Oh. Yeah, I mean, so many people have added to the Lovecraft mythos, and so many people will enjoy his style. Then to read through, got like an annotated Lovecraft book. I read through the novel, but I mean the Mountains of Madness. I haven't read all his short stories. Oh, right. Not Dragon of the West, Dragon naturally speaking. Yeah, there are lots of dragons about. Oh wow. Knee Beats streaming, playing games. We almost never get to raid her. Oh no, we gotta raid Neon Arcade again because he's on a partner push, and Twitch just announced that all raids automatically count. Raid views automatically count towards partnership threshold now without having to refresh or click on the title again to make it count. West of Innsmouth is your favorite story from the mythos? Or the new, like, that a relatively new Lovecraft mythos story? Dragon your ass. Yeah, we haven't seen you streaming in a bit, Matt. Glad. But I should check that. Yeah, it's been all over Twitter the last couple of days. Oh, the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society has dark adventure radio theater dramas. I would love that. I love radio drama and think horror radio plays are vastly underutilized, or had been traditionally. And I love the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society's Call of Cthulhu movie. That's like... Is it one of the best horror movies of the new millennium? I mean, I would say so, but I also admit it's an acquired taste. or it's not for everybody, say. I also saw they did a statement of Randolph Carter and a more modern one, or not, one in the 30s style, but I can't remember the name of it because I hadn't read the story before. Oh, Vampire Hunter D. I have heard of that. So it's... Oh, The Whisper in Darkness. That was probably the third Lovecraft Historical Society movie I was thinking of. Vampire Hunter D was the one who wrote West of Innsmouth. That sounds interesting. Oh, sorry I missed your live reading stream, Matt Glad. That's great that they make the radio drama sound like they're from the 20s, considering there wasn't exactly a whole lot of radio drama in the 20s. I'd like to see how they pull this off. But, yeah. I'm sorry, guys. I really do have to raid out. I should go to bed, but I also should do a little more work tomorrow. I've got to give comments on something in for one of the people because I didn't. How do I run out of time? Yeah, work. Work's gonna be crazy. Anyway. Yeah, I appreciate Yak. Yeah, good you too, Zatara. Oh no, I'm sorry, JD Tillinghast. Did you have to? You've got to get to work and have a bus to catch. Yeah, I know. I have to take the bus to work too, so I know how annoying that can be. Oh, you're listening to cassette tapes, Matt led. No VOD. Oh, so you stream without a VOD. You don't get copyright strikes. Interesting. I was thinking of doing a listening party for a horror CD this Spooktober, but thought I would get copyright strikes. But if you don't have a VOD, then food for thought. Well, thank you, JD Tillinghast. I'm glad you liked it. My pleasure, Yak, and good to see you, Zatara. And oh, yeah, that's good niftiness. Then I can. Well, then I think we're going to have a listening party for some short horror Saturday. Oops. Means I have to buy the CD. Oh no, I have to spend money on something horror related. Wouldn't have done that otherwise. Forget the underscore. It's like a voozle all over again. Yeah, exactly. Live only. Does not will exist otherwise. But thank you guys for coming to hang out and listen to Stories in the Dark by Barry Payne. You can follow me on Twitter and MySpace, where I post stream announcements and polls and random thoughts. And you can find VODs of my past streams up on YouTube. No more underscore problem with the Voozle? Oh, that's good, he finally got the normal name. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow for Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare. Assuming it works. But have a good night. Do not piss off the moon, where the moon will take you. And say hi to Neon Arcade and wish him good luck on his partner push. And I need dinner.